Greetings and welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling incidents in Missouri history. Please let me know where you're watching from and when you first heard this story in the comments section before we start. We're curious in the locations and times of day and night that these recorded accounts reach individuals worldwide. Two seasoned trappers set out on what should have been an ordinary journey in the fall of 1893. Deep in the Ozark wilderness of southern Missouri. What they found in those thick forests would cast doubt on all preconceived notions about human nature and the extent of a person's desperation. This is a comprehensive analysis of documented information that reveals something considerably more disturbing than a story of inexplicable events or otherworldly happenings. The ability of regular people to cross boundaries that ought to be avoided. Documents from the Crawford County Sheriff's Office are kept in the Missouri State Archives, from the winter of 1893 forward. Ezekiel Thornfield and Matthias Crane's case file is one of the yellow documents under unfinished investigations. Both men were experienced trappers who were well known in the area for their skill in negotiating the dangerous terrain of the future Mark Twain National Forest. Live off the land and the pelts they could collect during the profitable winter trapping season, these guys were used to live alone for months. At 34 years old, Thornfield had been. He has been working these forests since he was just 18. His father, who had worked the streams and ridges of the Ozark Mountains for decades, taught him the trapper trade. He was born in the little Missouri town of Cuba. Thornfield was characterized by his neighbors as a methodical man who approached his profession with the meticulous preparation of a military campaign. He kept meticulous records on weather patterns, animal behavior, and trapline maps, and he had earned a reputation for coming back from expeditions with cargoes of pelts that are dependably profitable. Matthias Crane had a completely different demeanor. Crane, who was 39 years older than his companion, had moved to Missouri from Pennsylvania in 1885 after learning that the Ozark region contained a large number of fur-bearing animals. Crane was an inventor, always looking for new methods in uncharted territory that would produce better results than Thornfield, who had inherited both his trade and his region. Although local trappers appreciated his skill, others thought he was erratic and prone to eschewing tried-and-true techniques in favor of experimental strategies that occasionally produced stunning achievements and other times total failures. After working nearby trap lines for 3 seasons, Thornfield and Crane formed a partnership. Originally rivals, they had found that their disparate methods of doing business worked well together. Thornfield's meticulous preparation brought stability and reliable outcomes, but Crane's openness to trying new things created chances that neither man could have had on his own. They had developed a practice by the fall of 1893 of cooperating during the best months of the trapping season, pooling their catches, and splitting the dangers and rewards of long trips into the far reaches of the Ozark wilderness. The guys had been gone for around 3 weeks, according to the first police report, which was dated November 15, 1893. When neither man returned to his separate family, their families became alarmed. Residences in Cuba, Missouri by October 25th, as per their agreement. Both guys were married and had developed distinct habits when it came to their travels. Cordelia, Thornfield's wife, said investigators that her husband had never been more than 2 days late returning after a trapping expedition, and that he always spoke with investigators in advance if bad weather or other unforeseen circumstances were expected to cause him to be late. Beatrice, Crane's wife, gave the investigators a similar story. She characterized her spouse as someone who. He meticulously planned his missions, weeks in advance, figuring out supplies, schedules, and anticipated yields. She testified that Crane had been very enthusiastic about this mission, thinking that he and Thornfield had discovered a section of the forest that had been virtually uncharted by other trappers. They anticipated returning with the most lucrative cargo of pelts any man had ever obtained, he had informed her. At first, the families thought that the early winter cold might have postponed the return of the men. The Ozark region experienced a number of strong storms in the fall of 1893, with significant snowfall occurring earlier than typical. However, worry gave way to fear as the days went by with no communication from the trappers, while other men who worked in the same approximate region went back to their houses on time. By the beginning of November, both families were putting pressure on the local government to launch a search and rescue effort. Deputy Sheriff Augustus Vale led the search team that eventually found their camp. One of the most accomplished woodsmen in the area, he had lived in the backcountry of Crawford County for the most of his 38 years. Vale put together a group of 8 seasoned trackers and hunters who knew the exact location where Thornfield and Crane intended to work. From Cuba, the search party left on November 10, 1893, carrying supplies for a week-long journey and armed with the most up-to-date maps of the area. Deputy Veal's official report states that the Thornfield Crane expedition area was a labyrinth of valleys and peaks that the search team had to navigate for 2 days. Even seasoned woodsmen found the terrain difficult, with thick vegetation, steep gorges, and multiple creek crossings that may turn impassable in heavy rain. Although the searchers discovered a number of ancient campsites with signs of recent habitation, none of them could be positively identified as belonging to the missing trappers. The hunt began early on November 12th. Group found what seemed to be a well-maintained path that led farther into the bush than any of the searchers had previously ventured. Broken branches and disturbed earth on the trail were obvious indicators of recent use, suggesting that people had been using it in the last few weeks. The search team followed this route for about 3 miles until coming to what the local hunters called Devil's Kettle, a natural clearing in a hollow. The actual clearing was nondescript, approximately 50 yards across. The open area is round and encircled by thick oak and hickory tree stands. The appearance of an apparently well-established camp, complete with a well-built lean-to shelter, an ornate fire pit surrounded by log benches, and different items of equipment that evidently suggested long-term occupation, was what made it noteworthy. The most important was the fire pit itself, which had blazing embers instead of cold ashes, indicating that someone had just been tending to the fire. According to Deputy Veal's report, the search party approached the camp with extreme caution, constantly calling out to let anyone inside know they were there and to ask them to identify themselves. The searchers approached to take a closer look at the camp when they received no reaction. One of the most perplexing missing person cases in Missouri history began with what they discovered, which defied simple explanation. The camp was arranged with great care, exhibiting the kind of focus that experienced. Years of living in the wilderness led to the development of trappers. The lean-to shelter was put together using methods that showed a great deal of skill, although it was clearly built with local resources. The building was large enough to comfortably house 2 people, had good ventilation, and was waterproof. Searchers discovered 2 bedrolls within the shelter, positioned on platforms made of braided branches that protected them from the chilly ground and kept them off the ground. Individual possessions were arranged with military accuracy. There were 2 rifle cases leaning against the shelter's rear wall, each with a well-kept weapon and enough ammunition. To keep clothes dry, they were folded and placed in canvas sacks. In order to prevent spoiling and deter woodland animal invasions, food was kept in sealed containers and cooking equipment was cleaned and placed close to the fire pit. Above all, the searchers found an assortment of pelts that symbolized weeks of effective trapping. It was clear from the way the furs were stretched and cleaned that whoever had been working here had the know-how to store their catch for later sailing. The amount and quality of the pelts indicated that the camp's residents had been incredibly successful in their trapping endeavors, far surpassing what most trappers could hope to achieve in a comparable time frame. According to Deputy Vale's report, every aspect of the camp indicated typical, effective trapping activities. The provisions were sufficient, the equipment was kept in good condition, and the collected pelts were worth a substantial sum of money. There was no sign of conflict, a rushed departure, or any emergency that could account for the camp's residents leaving their priceless belongings behind and vanishing into the forest. When the search team found personal belongings in the camp that were unquestionably belonging to Thornfield and Crane, the mystery became even more complicated. According to Cordelia Thornfield, her husband's unique hunting jacket, which she had altered to include extra pockets for trapping materials. Beatrice Crane recognized her husband's tobacco pouch and pipe, which he always brought on expeditions and would never have left behind on his own volition. A leather-bound journal belonging to Ezekiel Thornfield was discovered by the searchers among the abandoned belongings. The journal had entries from September 30th, when the trip started, to the last entry, dated November 8th, 4 days prior to the search team finding the deserted camp. The most comprehensive information on the trappers' last several weeks would be found in these journals, which would show a series of incidents that presented an increasingly unsettling picture of their time in the forest. Thornfield's journal's early entries describe an extremely successful journey. In the initial weeks of his writing, he describes ideal weather, great hunting conditions, and the sort of fruitful collaboration both men had hoped for. After hearing from other trappers of large beaver populations in the isolated valleys outside of the designated hunting grounds, Thornfield writes passionately about their intention to venture into uncharted terrain. Weather clear and cold, perfect for the season. The diary from September 30th states, Matthias suggests we push further east than either of us has been before. The town's old-timers mentioned beaver dams in the headwaters of Little Piney Creek that have never been properly worked. If we can find these sites, this could be our most lucrative season to date. On October 3rd, we found what we were looking for. Matthias was correct about the beaver population. We found 3 different dam complexes within 2 miles of our camp. The animals seemed to be unaffected by human activity, probably because few trappers venture this far into the hills. Today, we set our first trap line, and if the rest of the territory turns out similarly. Thornfield notes that Crane had developed an innovative approach to trap placement that took advantage of the natural geography of the area to funnel animals into positions where they could be captured efficiently, which required more initial labor than traditional methods, but promised significantly higher yields over the course of their trapping operations. Proof: we will return home with more pelts than we can carry. The entries from early October describe the establishment of their routine and the gradual expansion of their trapping operations. We are catching twice as many animals as I would normally expect in territory this rich. At this rate, we will have enough pelts to justify staying an extra week beyond our original schedule. October 8th. Matthias has outdone himself with the trapline design. His knowledge of how water flows through this valley system has allowed us to predict exactly where the animals will travel. By mid-October, however, minor changes start to appear in Thornfield's writing, even though the trapping was still successful. He starts discussing aspects of their situation that worried him. The first signs of trouble appear in his entry for October 12th, when he mentions that Crane had started investigating parts of the forest that don't seem to be related to their trapping operations. Matthias spent the majority of yesterday looking into what he claims are unusual rock formations about a mile north of our camp. I looked at the area myself and couldn't find anything noteworthy, but he insists there are signs. I told him that Indian camps are common in these hills, but he seems convinced that what he has found is somehow different. The entries from this period show a growing tension between the two men's approaches to their expedition. Thornfield remained focused on their stated goal of gathering pelts, while Crane was growing increasingly distracted by what he described as archaeological findings. Thornfield's writing indicates that he is frustrated with his partner's divided attention and worries that these distractions might interfere with their trapping operations. October 15th. I found Matthias this morning looking at what he says are carved symbols on a boulder near the creek. I spent 2 hours examining the rock myself and saw nothing but natural weathering patterns. When I suggested that we concentrate on checking our trap lines, he became defensive and accused me of lacking intellectual curiosity. This is not like him. Normally, Matthias is just as concerned with practical issues as I am. By late October, Thornfield's journal entries show that Crane's behavior had become more unpredictable. Instead of engaging in their regular trapping routine, Crane was spending entire days exploring areas that appeared to have nothing to do with their work. What's more concerning is that he was starting to make claims about his discoveries that Thornfield found hard to believe. On October 18th, Matthias returned to camp. He claims to have found caves with evidence of human habitation, but he won't show me these sites because he claims I wouldn't understand the significance of what he has found. Today, he is carrying what he insists are tools made by people who lived in these hills long before any Indian tribes we know about. The items seem like nothing more than ordinary stones to me, but he is convinced they show evidence of sophisticated craftsmanship. His partner's mental state. Crane's obsession with his purported archaeological finds had become so intense that he was ignoring the trap lines and basic camp maintenance. What's more concerning is that he had started saying things that suggested his hold on reality might be slipping. On October 22nd, Matthias asserts that the people who left the artifacts he has been finding were not regular people, mentioning things like cave paintings and tools with unfathomable accuracy. We were supposed to start our return journey on October 25th, but Matthias refuses to leave, saying we cannot abandon what he has discovered that the world must know about the evidence he has uncovered. When I reminded him of our responsibilities to our families, The entries for late October showed that Thornfield and Crane's partnership had completely deteriorated, with Thornfield managing the camp alone and growing increasingly concerned about their ability to return home safely before severe winter weather. Crane became enraged and accused me of being willing to sacrifice scientific discovery for mere profit. We are now 3 days past our planned departure date. Made travel impossible. October 28th. Matthias has been out of camp for 2 days. He left early yesterday morning with his pack and said he would show me conclusive evidence of his claims when he returned. I found myself alone in camp, tending to the fire and checking trap lines by myself. The weather is getting colder, and I worry that if we don't leave soon, we might be trapped here by snow. Thornfield's journal states that when Crane returned to camp, his behavior had gotten even more unsettling. On October 29th, Matthias returned at dawn with a bundle of canvas that he guards with jealousy, and he claims to have found a system of caves that extends deep into the hills with chambers that show evidence of habitation by people whose level of development exceeded anything we associate with the native tribes of this region. He talks about finding preserved artifacts, cave paintings that depict. Thornfield's account of his partner's condition indicates that Crane had been deeply shaken by his experience, as evidenced by astronomical events and evidence of metallurgy that shouldn't have existed in this part of the world. The journal records that Crane looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept during his 2-day absence, and that he seemed reluctant to provide specific details about what he had discovered. When asked for more information, Crane would only say that some knowledge was too dangerous to share without proper preparation. On October 30th, I tried to persuade Matthias that we needed to start our journey home right away because severe storms were reported to be approaching from the south. If we don't leave within the next few days, We risk being stuck here until spring." Matthias agreed that we needed to leave, but he insisted on making one last trip to the cave system he had found. He claims he needs to gather more evidence before we can safely disclose what we have learned. As weather conditions worsened and his partner's actions became more irrational, entries for early November reveal Thornfield's increasing desperation. Crane had become reticent about his activities, leaving camp for extended periods of time without providing an explanation, and returning with more artifacts that Thornfield was not allowed to examine closely. November 2nd, snow started to fall heavily, and the temperature dropped quickly. We checked our route back to Cuba and discovered that several creek crossings are all ready. Matthias appears unconcerned about our situation, saying that what he has found is worth any risk. See November 4th. Matthias revealed the contents of the bundle he has been guarding. The artifacts appear to be made from metals I do not recognize. They were worked with a precision that suggests tools far more sophisticated than anything I have ever seen. If we do not leave within the next 2 days, we will be forced to stay here until weather conditions improve. The cave paintings he has replicated are unsettling. They show events and creatures that I cannot identify, rendered with an artistic skill that seems impossible for primitive people. The journal entry for November 5th marks a turning point in Thornfield's story. Up until this point, he had maintained his skepticism about his partner's claims despite his concerns about Crane's behavior, but something that happened on this date seems to have convinced him that Crane's. November 5th, Matthias finally consented to show me the cave system he has been exploring, and what I saw there has shaken my understanding of this region's history and raised questions about the nature of the people who inhabited these hills before recorded settlement. The caves are extensive with chambers that clearly show long-term human habitation, and the artifacts Matthias has discovered are authentic and represent something far more significant than simple archaeological finds. Collected only make up a small portion of what is still present in those subterranean chambers. Po sauce. Thornfield's account of the cave system points to a complex of subterranean chambers that had been altered over a long period of time by human activity. He claims that the caves contained evidence of sophisticated engineering, including water management systems that regulated airflow and drainage, as well as living areas that had been thoughtfully planned to offer their occupants security and comfort. November 6th. I have never seen anything like the cave paintings, which show not only hunting scenes and animals but also astronomical events. The region's geographical features and human figures doing things I cannot understand. What is most unsettling are the paintings that seem to depict the caves themselves, with intricate depictions of chambers that reach much deeper into the earth than Matthias and I have been able to explore, according to the journal entry for November 7th. That Thornfield's investigation of the cave system had persuaded him that Crane's assertions regarding the importance of their discovery were true, but instead of sharing his partner's excitement for disclosing their find to the outside world, Thornfield had come to the conclusion that the knowledge they had acquired presented risks that neither man was prepared to face. November 7th. Having seen the full scope of what Matthias has discovered, I can see why he has been so deeply affected by. The implications of this discovery would challenge fundamental assumptions about human history in this region, but Thornfield's enthusiasm about the archaeological significance of their discovery was temperated by practical concerns about their situation. The evidence suggests that these caves were inhabited by people whose level of technological development far exceeded what we associate with the prehistoric inhabitants of North America. November 7th added, "But I have also realized that we are no longer alone in this wilderness," indicating that they were dealing with a dilemma that went beyond straightforward weather delays. Matthias and I discovered proof that someone is currently using these subterranean chambers while exploring the caves. Stores of fresh food, fire pits that have been used lately, and sleeping quarters that exhibit evidence of frequent use. These caverns are inhabited by someone, and they are conscious of our presence in the area. The consequences of this: Thornfield seems to have been persuaded that their predicament had become truly dangerous by the finding. His November 8th journal post details a discussion with Crane, during which both men agreed that they had discovered something that was too dangerous to ignore or just walk away from. On November 8th, Matthias and I talked about our circumstances and came to a challenging decision. Since the beginning of our journey, the existing inhabitants of the cave system have been aware of our presence. Proof indicates that they have been methodically watching us, getting to know our habits and perhaps getting ready for some kind of interaction throughout the cave. We can't just pack up our gear and head home like nothing happened. Both men had come to feel that their discovery of the cave system and its present occupants had put them in an impossible situation, according to the last entry in Thornfield's journal. They had information that they felt was unsafe to share with authorities. However, they also believed that they couldn't just leave the situation without running the danger of repercussions for future tourists to the area. Final entry on November 8th. Matthias and I have decided on a plan of action after much deliberation. Knowing what we have found here will not allow us to return to civilization. However, we also cannot disregard our obligation to safeguard anyone who might enter this region. We'll take action tomorrow to guarantee that these cavern secrets are kept safe, safeguarded, while also making sure that upcoming expeditions don't upset the current residents. Some information is too risky for the general public. Investigators are left with more questions than answers regarding Thornfield and Crane's final fate when the journal closes. Several partially filled holes were found during a thorough search of the area surrounding their abandoned camp. According to Deputy Veal's report indicating that the men had been involved in some kind of excavating work in the days before to their disappearance. But there was no indication of what they might have been trying to retrieve or bury, if anything. The bundle of canvas that Thornfield had described in his diary entries was one of the things catalogued from the abandoned camp. The package contained what seemed to be pieces of carved stone, pieces of wrought metal, and multiple sheets of paper with replicated images from cave paintings, according to Deputy Veal's inventory report. Items like these were brought to the Crawford County Courthouse for inspection, although there is no thorough assessment of their origin or importance in the official archives. When Deputy Veal made the decision to find and investigate the cave system mentioned in Thornfield's journal, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A small group of skilled woodsmen was gathered to perform a methodical investigation of the subterranean chambers using the crude map that was among the trappers' belongings. What they found would persuade authorities that the missing persons case. It was much more complicated than a straightforward forest mishap involving trappers. A thorough description of what the exploration team observed inside the caves may be read in Veal's private notes, which were found among his personal belongings following his death in 1923. These documents revealed that the underground complex was much larger than Thornfield's diary had indicated, with chambers that reached far into the hillside, and abundant proof of long-term human alteration. The intricate dwelling areas in the caves had rooms that were decorated with thoughtfully crafted stone and wood furniture and carved from the natural rock, while ventilation shafts made sure there was enough air circulation in even the deepest rooms. Water management systems directed underground streams to supply fresh water throughout the complex. In what they had presumed to be straightforward natural caverns, investigating authorities had not anticipated the degree of engineering skill displayed by these alterations. The objects discovered throughout the subterranean structure were more important. The tools and implements described in Veal's notes showed a degree of skill that didn't appear to fit the archaic technology usually associated with the area's prehistoric residents. Numerous items with alloys and working methods that seemed to be considerably more advanced than anything recorded in Native American societies during the historical period demonstrated metallurgy. The paintings in the cave. Thornfield's journal had much more amazing details than his written description had indicated. In addition to hunting and ceremonial scenes, Vale's team discovered rooms with walls covered in intricate drawings of astronomical observations, geographical surveys, and technical designs that seemed to portray engineering principles. These paintings' technical accuracy and artistic merit revealed a degree of cultural development that defied preconceived notions about the prehistoric past. People who live in the Missouri Ozarks. But Vale's investigation team's most unsettling finding was proof that the caves were, in fact, inhabited. Fresh food stockpiles, well-kept fire pits, and sleeping quarters that demonstrated continuous usage were among the indications of recent human activity that investigators discovered throughout the complex. With storage spaces holding manufactured items, preserved food, and personal belongings, it was obvious that the present occupants had been residing in the caves for a long time. Possessions that suggested a long-standing community. The cave inhabitants may have known about the investigation from the beginning, based on Veal's records. In areas of the complex that had not yet been examined, team members described a constant feeling of being watched by sounds and movements that suggested the presence of individuals purposefully avoiding touch. The investigators discovered evidence on multiple occasions that sites they had previously visited had been changed, with items relocated and passageways covered in ways that suggested deliberate attempts to hide the entire size of the underground settlement. The most important finding made by the exploration team was in the cave system's deeper chambers, where they discovered unmistakable proof of the activities that had apparently persuaded Thornfield and Crane that their discovery presented risks that could not be disregarded. Areas that seem to have been used for purposes that the investigating officers discovered deeply are described in Vale's notes, dealing with tools and setups that implied actions that were well beyond the bounds of what was considered appropriate human conduct. Vale chose to categorize this information and suggest that the cave system be permanently sealed to avoid future research or unintentional discovery by future tourists to the area, rather than going into specifics about these findings in his official reports. According to his notes, this choice was made after consulting with other members of the exploratory crew, who all agreed that maintaining the underground community's isolation from the outside world would better serve the public interest. By using dynamite to destroy the main entrances, the caves were sealed off, allowing the current occupants to remain inside the underground complex while prohibiting outsiders from accessing the chambers and their contents. According to Vale's memo, this decision was made regretfully and with full knowledge that it condemned unknown numbers of individuals to long-term underground detention, but with the belief that the alternative presented intolerable dangers to the local communities. In the summer of 1894, Thornfield and Crane's disappearance was officially closed, and both men were pronounced dead from unspecified reasons. The cave expedition and the decision to lock the underground complex are not mentioned in the case files, and questions regarding the missing trappers were routed to the conventional conclusion that they had been hurt in an accident in the wilderness. The official conclusion of the investigation did not, however, bring an end to the tale of the sealed caves and the missing trappers. In the years that followed, a number of accidents in the area indicated that the cave sealing's effects had not been as definitive as officials had hoped. Unusual activity in the woodlands surrounding Devil's Kettle started to be reported, with hunters and loggers reporting encounters with people who seemed must rely only on the land for their livelihood. These accounts frequently spoke of individuals who were more skilled in the bush than even the most seasoned outdoor enthusiasts. Witnesses described persons who were able to travel silently through the forest, who appeared to have a deep understanding of animal behavior and seasonal variations, and who seemed to be surviving in environments that would soon prove lethal to the average person. Reports of organized thievery from hunting camps were the most alarming. Logging activities in the area. Supplies and equipment were vanishing from safe havens, always snatched by someone who could get close and steal things without leaving any trace. Although it was obvious that humans, not animals, were responsible for the crimes, the subtlety with which they were carried out showed skills much above those of typical thieves. These instances were looked into by local law enforcement, but their efforts were hindered by the total lack of evidence that could be used to identify or find the criminals. No footprints were discovered. The stolen goods vanished entirely without any indication of where they might have been taken, and witnesses were never able to give thorough descriptions of the suspects. For a number of years, the thefts and enigmatic meetings persisted, steadily fostering a sense of anxiety among those who went or worked in Crawford County's rural districts. Many seasoned hunters and trappers had started to steer clear of the area by the early 1900s, essentially turning Devil's Kettle into an unofficial wilderness area where few outsiders went. The hunting team that arrived in the area in October 1902 provides the most thorough description of interaction with the enigmatic woodland inhabitants. Despite never actually encountering another person during their 5 days in the bush, this team found unmistakable signs of human activity throughout their adventure, according to a report submitted to the Missouri State Game Commission. The hunting team. They had organized a standard deer hunting trip in an area that had previously been thought to be secure and fruitful, under the direction of an accomplished guide named Isaiah Montgomery. But as soon as they set foot in the field, they noticed indications that they weren't the only ones in the jungle. The next morning, equipment that had been meticulously secured every night would be discovered in slightly altered locations with no sign of how these alterations had taken place. What was more disturbing was the party's expanding awareness that during their visit they were being watched in a methodical manner. Overnight, game that they had tracked effectively during the day would vanish. It appears that the animals were taken by someone who was able to go close to them and take them away, without leaving any traces for skilled hunters to follow. Although party members claimed to have felt observed from the nearby woodland on several occasions, thorough searches turned up no evidence of human habitation. The experience of the hunting team arrived at. It culminated on their 4th night in the forest when they heard noises that suggested someone was roaming around their camp. Several partygoers reported seeing shadowy people at the edge of their firelight, seemingly watching them from the darkness as they looked out from their tents. The creatures instantly fled when they yelled, moving through the brush with a hush that seemed unattainable for humans. The hunting group found out the next morning that the nighttime event had not been a shared hallucination. There was unmistakable proof that someone had visited their camp while they were asleep. None of the party members could decipher the symbols in the message that had been etched into the bark of a tree close to their fire pit, but it was obvious that some sort of intentional communication had taken place. The hunting party's realization that their food supply had been methodically inspected during the visit at night. Containers had been meticulously resealed and put back in their original locations after their contents had reportedly been inspected or sampled. The accuracy with which this had been completed indicated that the person who had carried out this inspection had both a great deal of competence and in-depth understanding of how such goods were normally packed and stored. The hunting team decided to end the expedition early and head back to Cuba right away. The State Games Report. The Commission suggested that the area surrounding Devil's Kettle be formally declared off-limits to recreational hunting because it seemed to be inhabited by people whose ties to the civilized world had been severed to such an extent that contact between the two groups could only lead to tragedy. Although this suggestion was never put into practice, the local outdoor community quickly learned of the hunting party's experience. Few hunters had licenses by 1905, or trappers were prepared to enter the deeper forest areas surrounding Devil's Kettle, so establishing an unofficial exclusion zone that was mostly deserted by outsiders. When the state of Missouri recognized a sizable portion of the Crawford County wilderness as a protected natural area in 1908, The unofficial status of this exclusion zone was formally established. This designation was officially justified by the necessity to safeguard delicate animals and maintain distinctive geological features. Environments. Locals, however, realized that the true goal was to prevent the public from unintentionally coming into contact with whatever was residing in the dense forest surrounding Devil's Kettle. Father Michael Shannon, a Catholic priest who served the dispersed rural communities of Crawford County, wrote a series of letters between 1920 and 1925 that contain the last known mention of the Thornfield Crane case. These letters, which were saved in the diocese, were sent to several church officials. Father Shannon's efforts to serve those he described as lost souls who were outside the sphere of Christian civilization are detailed in the archives. Conversations with his parishioners, many of whom had described meeting people who seemed to be living completely outside the bounds of typical human civilization, had made Father Shannon aware of the issue. These accounts frequently detailed individuals who appeared to have magical skills for surviving in the outdoors, who avoided interacting with organized societies at all and seemed to be adhering to a social structure that was unrecognizable to the general public. In response to these allegations, Father Shannon tried several times to get in touch with the forest people in an effort to provide them with spiritual support and help reintegrate into society. In his letters, he details several trips into the forest near Devil's Kettle, where he left clothing, food, and religious items in places where he believed the individuals he was trying to assist would find them. The outcomes of the priest's efforts were not entirely consistent. It appears that his intended beneficiaries were certainly locating and utilizing the things he left behind because they were regularly taken. His attempts at direct communication, however, were unsuccessful. Father Shannon never managed to establish direct communication with any of the people in the forest, even though there was ample proof that they were aware of his presence and that they were accepting his offerings. People who live in forests. The reactions Father Shannon started to get to his pastoral endeavors were more concerning. Several times, when he went back to places where he had left supplies, he discovered that adjacent trees had biblical verses and religious symbols carved into them. His intended audience appeared to be literate and knowledgeable about Christian theology based on these messages, but their reactions revealed a theological viewpoint that was very different from what the Church taught. The engraved messages are often alluded to themes of purification, judgment, and the necessity of keeping the virtuous and the corrupt apart. In his letters, Father Shannon expresses his growing concern that the forest dwellers had established a kind of religious belief that justified their exclusion from society at large and may be used to justify actions that the Church could never approve of. During his expedition in the summer of 1922, Father Shannon made the most important find when he discovered what looked to be a cemetery in a distant clearing in the middle of the protected forest. There were perhaps 24 graves in the cemetery, each with a plain wooden cross and a row arrangement that suggested years of meticulous design and upkeep. The cemetery displayed fresh wild flowers and thoughtfully placed stones, suggesting that someone was caring for these graves with a great deal of dedication, according to Father Shannon's assessment. Upon reviewing the burial monuments, the priest discovered dates ranging from the 1890s until the beginning of the 1920s, indicating that this cemetery had been cared for many years by the woodland community. The most important finding was Father Shannon's finding that dates on a number of the burials matched the time shortly after Thornfield and Crane vanished, suggesting that the last resting place of the missing trapper had been found. According to Father Shannon's letters, he decided to hold religious services at the cemetery because he thought the souls interred there. Regardless of the circumstances surrounding their deaths, they were entitled to a decent Christian burial. But what he described as obvious indications that his actions were being watched and that his presence was unwanted cut short his attempt to carry out his duties. The priest claimed to have heard noises that he took to be warning or communication attempts, as well as movements in the nearby woodland that indicated the presence of several persons. Despite these disruptions, he carried on with his scheduled service. Discovered that equipment that inexplicably malfunctioned and obstructions that emerged in his path were purposefully impeding his efforts. Father Shannon's decision to stop his direct intervention attempts is detailed in his last letter to the forest inhabitants, which was written in December 1925. The priest had come to the conclusion that the people living in the deep forests had established a society that, despite being far different from mainstream civilization, seemed to provide them with. Provided everything they required to survive and even a way to find spiritual fulfillment. According to the letter, his years of observation had persuaded him that the woodland community was a functional society with its own traditions, beliefs, and social structure rather than just a group of people who had escaped from civilization. He had seen signs of collaboration, preparation, and support for one another that indicated these people had successfully adapted to their surroundings and had established durable lifestyles that were independent of interaction with the outer world. Father Shannon suggested to his church leaders that the forest people should be allowed to live their own lives without any further intervention from outsiders. He maintained that attempts to drive them back into mainstream society would probably be more detrimental than beneficial, because their survival over many decades showed that they had discovered solutions to the problems of their life. There is no documentation in the diocese or archives of any formal reaction to Father Shannon's correspondence or more church engagement regarding the forest inhabitants. But according to the records, Father Shannon kept up his custom of leaving sporadic offerings at the edge of the protected forest area until his own death in 1934, and he continued to include the wilderness community in his daily prayers. The tale of Matthias Crane and Ezekiel Thornfield, as well as the greater enigma surrounding the woodland settlement they reportedly came across, constitute one of the most well-documented instances of individuals choose to live completely outside the bounds of society at large. A society that has successfully preserved its independence from the civilized world for well over a century is suggested by the body of data gathered from government investigations, first-hand recollections, and decades of indirect observation. The records kept in several Missouri archives depict individuals who, under situations that the general public could never comprehend or accept, made the remarkable choice to completely leave the civilized world and establish something new in the American wilderness. Their story serves as a reminder that the line separating civilization from wildness has always been more pliable than we might like to think, and that when the alternative becomes intolerable, there have always been those who are prepared to cross that line permanently. Whether Thornfield and Crane eventually became part of the woodland community they learned, they died in, trying to keep its secrets hidden, or met a far different end. Their narrative demonstrates the nuanced interplay between societal responsibility and personal preference. According to the evidence, both men came to the conclusion that their responsibilities to their families and communities were subordinated to their duty to shield the forest inhabitants from outside intervention, a choice that might have saved what they had grown to appreciate even more, but that cost them all they had previously treasured. 2 people were killed in the Missouri wilderness. Its secrets are still guarded by skilled trappers from 1893. And maybe that's just the way it should be. The notion that there are still locations where people might vanish utterly and where communities can exist totally outside the purview of social norms and governmental authority in a world that is becoming smaller and more interconnected by the day, provides a glimmer of hope to individuals who recognize that certain types of freedom can only be attained by total detachment from all aspects of mainstream culture. Regarded as necessary and typical, the bonfire that remained warm when rescuers discovered the deserted camp represents lives that were cut short rather than ended, decisions taken in situations that most people would never encounter, and secrets that some people will stop at nothing to preserve. Ultimately, Thornfield and Crane's destiny serves as a reminder that some types of information may come at the expense of our preconceived notions about who we are and where we fit in the world. Additionally, that certain discoveries are too significant for us to go back to our previous lives unaltered.